everybody, it's Colette Baron-Reid. I'm so excited today to be welcoming my special guest, Robert Ohotto, for a very insightful conversation all about Mercury Retrograde. So Robert is a phenomenal intuitive astrologer, and he's also the founder of Holocompass Astrology. He's brilliant, one of the best teachers on the planet, and here you are, Robert. Welcome.
Colette, it's so good to be here with you.
Yay. So listen, I happen to love Mercury retrograde because I use it in a specific way. So I would love you to tell everybody, in your words, what is Mercury retrograde? And then we'll go into what's coming up in Mercury retrograde.
Sure. So I'm glad you're asking me because there's a lot of superstition around this particular cycle. And you just hear people all the time talking about how you shouldn't take a trip or get a new computer or, all these things. And there's some truth in that superstition, which I'll talk about in a minute here. But what Mercury retrograde is, I want you to get an image of, and this is why I call it holocompass astrology, that we live in a hologram, that we live in an energetic matrix. And inside of this matrix of creation that we're all fused to, we exist in cycles of time. And these are creative, these are archetypal. And then now add in, we've all got what I call a soul contract, this journey of becoming something new. Our soul's on this new creative mission. But for us to create in this life, we have to have cycles that take us into unknown parts of ourselves. And that's really what a Mercury retrograde serves. It's this deep dive into the unknown of your potential. So the way through and down into that potential is actually through the shadow. And what a Mercury retrograde does is it kind of just takes this moment and says, look, we got to pause out what you think with your ego mind is meant to be, or is in your potential, or is ahead for you. And we have to actually go in deeper to explore a territory you don't know about yourself yet. I mean, for all the talk we have about potential, the truth is it's the unknown part of ourselves. Think about it. Anything that comes from our potential comes from the unknown, miraculous, magical side of our soul contract, of our destiny. So as human beings, psychologically, we're not really privy to want to go down deep and get into hugging dragons in the shadow and, kind of look around at what we're meant to become. And we like to, even though we like to think we like change, we don't really. We want change, but on the terms of the old.
Right.
So what Mercury retrograde does, it says, look, I got to pause you out. I've got to get your ego mind in the back seat because there's more you're meant to be. And to get to more of what you're meant to be, you have to go to the unknown. It's just a cosmic creative law. And what Mercury retrogrades then offer is this opportunity to go in whatever way the Mercury retrograde takes you, which will oftentimes be symbolized by the sign it's happening to be retrograde in, take you into this unknown part of yourself. And then you just begin exploring whatever wants to come up next. So what this looks like on the ground level for lots of people can be like, to get to the unknown part of myself, I need better boundaries. I need to be in a different kind of relationship with the unknown itself. Instead of this controlling, I want the new on the terms of the old kind of thing that all of us on a human level do. So Mercury retrogrades come in and they say, look, it's time for you to unlock a new level of your potential. Now, let's just sidestep that, put that to the side, and let's look at superstition. Okay. So what a lot of us have heard is, Mercury retrogrades are just simply about miscommunications, hard drives crashing, getting in accidents. I mean, we all you've heard the tales of, well, we all have. Now, here's what's true about that. Inside of the archetype of Mercury and its energetics is something called the trickster. So when we don't listen to what our soul, our spirit, and our potential is whispering in our ear, when we don't listen to what that truth is, we have to then hear it another way. Right. And that's where the trickster comes in. The trickster says, okay, you're not listening to the truth directly, so now I'm going to trick you into it. And that can look like a lot of different things. It can look like a hard drive crashing. It can look like a missed flight, a miscommunication, but that's just the surface symptom. If you go beneath that, what's really happening is it's like your spirit team saying, listen, we got to get your ego mind out of the way. So let's tie you up in a hard drive crash. Let's tie you up in a lost cell phone. Let's tie you up. And this can be mitigated. This can be completely mitigated if you were to cultivate and practice an approach to Mercury retrogrades that went something like this. This is a 3-week, 4-week window for me to look at something I didn't know was coming in my potential, get out of my own way, and just allow myself to really listen to what the message, Mercury is a messenger for me is. Now, speaking of Mercury being a messenger, let's get a little bit more holographic again, because what Mercury retrogrades do is, remember, Mercury was the messenger of the gods. Now, if everyone could just image that we have these inner forces that we used to project into the sky called gods, but they're really also interior creative forces in us. And what Mercury's message is, it's a message on behalf of all of the greater creative forces in play in our lives at this moment. So anytime there's a Mercury retrograde, I want everyone to just kind of imagine that, okay, Mercury has a message from my inner gods for me, from my inner creative pantheon and my inner creative team. And it's not one perhaps that my ego mind is down with. Why? Because it means I'm going to have to change and go into the unknown. And we all know how we feel about that. So we get, if we don't align, then the trickster activates, and then we do end up in all sorts of different phenomena. But the phenomena is really not just superstitious, well, it's Mercury retrograde, therefore, it's technically something in play at an energetic dynamic that most people don't go deeper into. So you can't just go hide away and then expect like your angels to stop talking to you because you decided you don't want to hear a message. The better alignment is to say, hey, I'm going to listen this time. What do you got? And we got to remember, those messages will always be about change, transformation, facing things you might be afraid of. But if you face them, well, that's when you get the message and you move on with this new integrated perspective of, okay, I thought I was going this way, but I'm really turning right and going this way. And yay, that's got some new magic for me, and it's not conditioned by my old self and its patterns of self-sabotage, etc. So that's really, in essence, what I think a Mercury retrograde serves. And it's dynamic, it's alive. And that's something I think that we all have to realize about astrology. It's what we live. Yeah. It's not just some star system in the sky. It's in you. It's literally inside of you. And it then becomes, if we look to, okay, well, that's happening out there, that's happening in here at the same time, this now becomes a brilliant tool of synchronicity, a system of synchronicity.
And don't you find as well, too, because the retrograde means going backwards, right? So we get a chance to revisit some of the things that we might not have done, right? We may not have actually done some of the shadow work as it's come up for us. So it gives us an opportunity to slow down over those 3-week period, right? And I notice that mostly, though, I find the retrograde impacts me mostly before the actual date, like in that, do you call it the shadow period? It's because I know we're talking about shadow work, which is really looking at the stuff we need to change in us, but this is more, there's a word for it. It's called the shadow period, is it?
I'll give it to you.
Yeah, okay.
So this is another thing to understand about Mercury retrograde. It's not just those 3 weeks while Mercury is appearing to go backward in the sky. It's actually a 3-phase alchemy.
Right.
So what you're talking about, I call it the setup phase. Other people would call it the shadow of the Mercury retrograde.
Right.
Or, I call this the setup phase. And then what that means is you're entering into the Mercury retrograde zone. Now, the best way I can language this is that, Mercury is going to hit into some degree of the zodiac or a couple, and that could be, it could retrograde in 1 sign or 2 signs, but it's going to hit into this archetypal band of energy and patterns that once again is in you, in me. And it's also in the world. It's all of it. That's why it's holographic. Everything's interconnected here. So when it hits that zone, when the setup phase begins, and I would always encourage everybody, know when the setup phase starts, because you're right, Colette, that's when things start to activate and animate. And it's like your psyche and the world and then the matrix itself is going, okay, here's where we have to point you toward the next incoming changes.
I like that you said it was a setup as opposed to shadow. I mixed it up because I feel the story I'm going to be working with is set up at that time. I know what those middle 3 weeks are going to do for me if I'm willing to work with it. Like I always know ahead of time, like, ooh, this is the stuff I'm going to have to be working with during this retrograde cycle. Can you tell us a little bit more about that section after also? What do you call that?
Yeah. So there's the setup phase, and that's a brilliant way to language it. I love that. It's setting up the story. Absolutely. It's setting up the alchemy. It's setting up the transformation in the area of your life. So you can look to your life to see what themes are starting to kind of come up. Like you start to notice, like there's something up, man. There's like a theme kind of constellating, and I keep getting this sort of situation in my life. And if you're really intuitively paying attention,
Yeah.
then this is going to dial you in so you don't get that trickster.
Yeah.
So then you go station retrograde, is when Mercury stands still in the sky and then begins to go back. And that's when we start to go down into our unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to start looking around and go, okay, what's going on? And this will be different for everybody. But that's when you start to, in your language, you would be like really deconstructing the story.
Right.
You know, what's going on in the story that really isn't true. That's blocking forward potential, new potential from coming forward. Then this is another thing to realize. There's a midpoint to the cycle. Right. Now, I love the imagery of the midpoint, and it happens inside the retrograde itself. And then we'll get to what is called the integration phase that you asked about. The midpoint is when the sun, so this is Mercury, this is the sun, they kind of come and they align. They align exact in the sky. And this is when, image this, it's like your higher self, the sun, right? This beacon of destiny aligns with Hermes and shoots a message into your psyche at that midpoint. If you're doing the work, if you're doing this, you know, the opening up to the unconscious, the unknown, the shadow, you get this zap of light. It's kind of like the midnight point of the dark night. And that light then says, hey, you thought it was this way, but it's this way. And sometimes it's just not even like this deep, dark shadow dive. Sometimes it's just this. There's information in the whole holographic field for your potential that you don't see yet. It's been out of your periphery. So you've got to wait till it aligns and boom at that midpoint, whether it's the unconscious kind of revealing a shadow dynamic or old pattern that needs to go. And that is tying into the going back in time that you were talking about. We have to go back to where those patterns came from. That's why it is a retrograde, a kind of return to our history. But it can also just be, I didn't calculate that factor in my peripheral vision of what was going, and direct vision of what was going to become an important part of me making choices, taking action, because I didn't have that information in play. And it's like Hermes saying, wait, I got more information for you. You're not seeing the whole holographic grid. I got to get you out of your way and let things come into focus for you. So then that midpoint is when you get this kind of like moment usually of, okay, this is when I got to pay attention, look alive. And then that's usually middle of the retrograde, about 10 days, 11 days into the retrograde itself. So we're still inside the retrograde. Then from there, you get more information. You kind of open this door. It's like going into a library, or finding a hidden door to a library and going, oh my God, there's a whole library here. And now you got to go look around in that library. And then the station direct, that's when the retrograde happens. And then from that point on, for about 3 weeks, you go to the integration phase. And what that is, Colette, it's when you or anybody has to then take all that information you just got out of this cycle and make choices with it. Take it to the streets of your life, make some pivots, change it up. And a lot of times it can really be like, oh my God, I didn't realize that piece was in play. And yay, because it just completely reframes everything in a way in a way that's going to benefit me. Now I can make really solid intuitive choices here and plans because now I have more data, more information that's going to be important to what I want to do or what I want to, see happen.
I think this is one of the best descriptions I have ever heard about how to work with Mercury retrograde. Because when you think about it, if you just look at the the news media where it says, like the magazines, here's the Mercury retrograde, don't book a flight, don't do this, like you said, the superstitious piece, but very rarely do I see such a detailed, or I don't think I've ever seen it in the general public, this is how you work with Mercury retrograde. Know that there's going to be a setup to the story, that you're going to be deconstructing it. Then you're going to have an invitation because it's an invitation. Yeah. And I noticed when I didn't do the work, because really astrology is reflection, the stars in us, right? But we still have free will. We still have, that's how you wrote a book about turning fate into destiny, right? Yeah. Fate is this invitation, but destiny is what we do with it. It's the actions and the wisdom that we gain from it, the application of that wisdom, the integration of it, all of that alchemical stuff, right? Or you walk away from the table and go, oh, I just won't travel. You know what I mean? So this is, you can go as far as you want with this, I think, dive deep.
I think the key word is alchemy, because what I would language it this way. And it's no one's fault. It's just kind of where we come from in our evolution. Our astrological models were more medieval in the history of our, of evolution and consciousness on the planet, meaning we always looked at traditionally planets causing things. And we were just the victims of these fated energetics and patterns on planet Earth. Whereas what I learned in my work was that in this new holographic, co-creative, intuitive quantum age, that we actually, yes, there is the weather, that the weather is the weather. The Earth's got its own process of evolution and it's got its own psychic field, and we're locked into those energetics. But, you can use the weather, as you said, as an opportunity if you understand it and if you read it right. And if you kind of go, hey, wait a minute, I'm not a victim here. Yeah. That's an astrology of victim consciousness. This is an astrology of co-creative consciousness. It says, there's fate and destiny. There's fate and destiny. Both are here.
This is so powerful because it's something that people toil a lot with. They still use the term manifest and not really sure what it means. But when I talk about co-creation, people's eyebrow goes up because it really is a partnership, right? Yeah. These are all invitations. Yeah. Astrological cycles are invitations to evolve. Right? I mean, we can stay in our comfort zone and be pushed out. And we realize that at some point we'll have to deal with it, or we come back next lifetime and deal with it. Or we have an invitation through astrology, because astrology tells us the what. What is it? What's the story? What are the elements? What are the flavors of, what are the I guess, the components of the alchemy? What are you putting together to make something new? I really like the way this is, because the way you're talking about it, it is co-creative. The energies of the universe works with you in tandem. You're not alone. It's not by your will, right?
And what that gives you too, Colette, is what you're just saying here is that it gives us a passport back into holism.
Yeah.
We get to come back to the holism of creation. Yeah. And that's what the co is about. It's like, I am a co in the holism of creation.
Yeah.
And that's, man, when you get into that, you're able to harness power from the whole.
Yeah.
And you're able to work with energy from the whole.
And you do it on behalf of the whole. And you're doing it on behalf of the whole.
Exactly.
Right? It's a
you're
very
doing it
different
to serve the holism, to serve it, and to serve your interconnectedness. And that's what I've seen in my work, is that you have to, if you really want to max destiny out, if you really want to go for that passion you have and create, it's got to be connected to service. And that ties you right to holism. So the retrograde, Mercury retrograde, is always serving service.
Yeah.
And so people, they get into this superstition or just, victim consciousness with astrology and the planets causing things. We are in this, we interbe with it all. So why not figure out what's the max grace I can, and juice I can bring to this whole grid of life? And is there something in my soul that's waiting to be born, that's wanting to come from my potential? And the answer is yes. But then also we got to go, okay, but I have to have a really healthy relationship with the unknown then, because that's where all that is.
And I think having a healthy relationship with uncertainty. So because I think that's really key, is to recognize that the unknown is unknown, but the uncertainty is the emotional engagement with the unknown, right? We feel uncertain. We don't have our footing. So we have to be in relationship to uncertainty in a way that it doesn't prevent us from stepping into things, right? Because I think we get into control when we're resisting uncertainty. We're, like you said, we want change, but we want it to change, but not really. Kind of on the old way of experiencing things. We want change, but we want it to look exactly the same that the comfortable stuff was, right? Yeah. So don't let it hurt. When in fact, it's part of the process. We can't bypass it.
Well, and this is where your spirituality hits the streets, because if you really believe in a plan, destiny and fate and co-creation, well, you have to then align to those laws and those truths and say, look, I'm one, not in complete control ever anyway. Second, I don't get to, something new comes from something new. So uncertainty and the unknown go hand in hand. These are partners in creation. Yeah. They're part of it all. And we can't get to what we're meant to be by holding on to what we've been. That's what we know. That's why the retrograde takes you back to what you know, but it helps you kind of unravel. This is what you know, but it's not adequate for where you're going.
Okay, so let's kind of summarize this in a general way. So if somebody knows Mercury retrograde is coming, and we know that there's a setup phase and we know there's an integration phase, but the most important phase is in the center, those 3 weeks that everybody knows are there. How can they work with those 3 weeks so that they walk away with something on the other side, something valuable. What advice would you give people about how do we work with Mercury retrograde in general?
Yeah, in general, I think the best approach to Mercury retrograde is to start to look through your life and at your life through symbolic eyes. You have to get to the symbolic archetypal place, which means to say, on a grounded level, start watching your life in the setup phase for themes. Like if you've got relationship dynamics that keep kicking up, or if you've got a choices starting to kind of come into view that you have to make, and a crossroads. And let me just throw this in as an aside. A lot of people think that you can't make any choices during a Mercury retrograde. That's not true. What is true is to say, I have to be mindful of the reality. I'm getting more information through this retrograde process that'll inform my choices. So maybe I should slow it up a little bit.
Right.
Sometimes you're coming to a crossroads where you've been putting off a choice. Let's say you've got boundary issues in a relationship and you know it. It's been flaring up for years or months. And finally the retrograde pressures you to make the pivot of setting a boundary, maybe ending a relationship or breaking up with someone, and that's when you need to make it. Is like, look, you've come to this crossroads. That's just an example to extrapolate from, where you've got to execute some decisions. So I would look alive at what themes are coming up. Know the sign it's retrograde in. That's going to dial you in right away. Like if you know what sign it's in and it's kind of an energetics and archetypes, you can go, okay, well, for example, it's a retrograde in Gemini. Well, I've got to understand this is going to be a lot about how I think, how I perceive, whether I think in either or versus both and. You want to start to track these things that block your potential. Right. And then in the retrograde, you have to really be in the capacity to do some shadow work. You have to, and that means no matter what you see in your shadow, you're always enough. Love yourself no matter what.
Yeah.
And if you do that, it'll open you to see more, because you're not judging it as soon as you see it. The more you judge something in your psyche, the more it hides from you. Yeah. So it's about this practicing unconditional love, practicing unconditional perception, and practicing a capacity to go, okay, I've got to see my life symbolically, because that's where the power is. That's where the patterns are. That's where the power pivots are. Is really, and the choices from there come down to the ground level. Yeah, but you'll connect it. And then in the integration phase, you start executing it all. So in the retrograde phase, just keep a little diary of, okay, what decisions, what's being worked out here? What are my themes? What are my stories, as you said? Identify your stories, and then identify your power in it, Colette. You've got to know you're not powerless here.
Right.
It's okay. What's my story? Where's my power? And yeah, you want to know your powerlessness too. You can't control other people, for example. You can't control the wind, but can you fly a kite when it's blowing? Hell yeah. Yeah. So know that, and then in the integration phase, get down to business, execute those decisions, move your life along. People have to start trusting themselves. Yeah. And remember, the message of Mercury retrograde is always a message of holism. In other words, where am I not seeing the whole, or acting in alignment to the mystical truth, all is one in some way, or acting in alignment to the other creative karmic forces of life. I need to know about those. Those inform everything I create too. We co-create with each other. We co-create with it all. So it's a brilliant moment to take a step back, evaluate power and powerlessness. Look at what choices you've been not making and you need to. And for God's sakes, do not let superstition run this process. You won't benefit. It's not useful. If you're getting the trickster, take a minute and go, okay, this is what I do. All right, I know that's trickster energy. I know trickster energy like the back of my hand now. I'm so, learned at this stuff, but no trickster energy. Know when you're getting some sort of almost electrical resistance in your psyche and in your field and with other people. Take a minute and go, what's that about? I need to explore that. Great. And then take a minute, pause out until you get some kind of answer. And remember, this is about really aligning to new things. So look at the new that's trying to happen and ask yourself, can I unconditionally let this flow? Or do I got conditions from my old self, which we all do in some way, that are like, so I want the new, but I don't want to break up with my boyfriend or girlfriend. I want the new, but I don't want to leave my job. I want the new, but that's where we all end up in some way. So those are some just pointers to really get it grounded. And if you do this, it becomes a completely empowered co-creative process.
I love that. Thank you so much, Robert. This is a really juicy video for people who are interested in learning more of the complexities of Mercury retrograde. There is so much. I'm going to watch this video again for myself. It was fantastic. And thank you so much.
Thank you, sweetheart.